Welcome to the latest episode of Al-Shabaka's Policy Lab series. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Nadim Bawalsa, Commissioning Editor at Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. For our last Policy Lab of 2022, we reposition our analytical lens from Palestine, the Arab world, and the US to Europe, where efforts to quash Palestine solidarity activism have been on the rise. In France, Spain, and Germany, authorities, under influence by Zionist supporters and Israeli lobbyists, have been ramping up efforts to suppress Palestine solidarity activism in a variety of forums, whether in city streets, university campuses, or in concerted media campaigns. As a result, Palestinians and their allies in these countries are facing more legal measures to criminalize their rights to boycott and critique the Israeli regime. While we may be more accustomed to hearing about this in countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom more recently, what does this imply for the solidarity movement in these European nations and for European citizens' rights to free speech? How does each context differ? What is at stake for Palestinians and their allies in each country and for citizens of these countries more specifically? And what has been done and what needs to be done to counter these troubling events? Joining us tonight to discuss the European landscape are Abir Kopty and Nadia Silhi Chahin. Al-Shabaka's policy analyst Abir Kopty is a Palestinian journalist and writer based in Berlin. She holds an MA in political communication from City University London and is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Media and Communication Studies at the Freie Universität Berlin. She contributes political analysis to media outlets such as the Middle East Eye and TRT. In 2018, she hosted the Aib podcast, discussing motherhood and parenting. And in 2020, she hosted the Al-Mustajad podcast, covering the COVID-19 pandemic in the Arab world. Nadia Silhi Chahin is a PhD candidate at Edinburgh Law School. She holds a master's degree in advanced human rights studies from the University of Carlos III de Madrid and an LLB from the University of Chile. A Chilean of Palestinian descent, Silhi Chahin is a licensed lawyer in Chile. In December 2021, she was awarded the Human Rights Award by the Human Rights Institute of the University Carlos III de Madrid. Her research and teaching interests include international law, with a special focus on human rights and humanitarian law, freedom of expression, nonviolent resistance, boycotts, Palestine studies, and feminism in the Arab world. Thank you both for being with us tonight. As always, I'd like to remind our audience of the format of the Policy Lab. For the first 30 minutes or so, Nadia and Abir will answer questions from me, and then thereafter, they will receive questions from you, our audience. Should you have a question throughout the discussion, please feel free to add one by clicking on the button at the bottom of the screen that says Ask a Question. Questions can be voted on, and I will do my best to answer as many of the questions as possible. If you would be able to address one of the questions to one of our speakers, that would also be greatly appreciated. So without further ado, let's begin our questions. Abir, let's start with you. You're based in Germany and you've been researching and covering developments on this front. Can you tell us what the current state of affairs is for Palestinian activists and their allies and the right to free speech in Germany? How did this situation come about?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Nadim, thank you, and thanks to Al-Shabaka for organizing this lab. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think I would like to start my talk today with quoting something that was published in the media by a journalist, a German journalist who published a piece of opinion, a column, in the Taz newspaper, which is considered in Germany to be a leftist newspaper. So I'm quoting, anti-racism is still necessary. It can be expressed, for example, in joy over Moroccan soccer successes. But to give this joy an anti-Semitic touch is the twist with which gangs like the Qatari ruling house want to secure their power. End of quote. So this is a free translation of that I did from German. And this was a piece published 2 days ago discussing the fact that the Moroccan football team raised the Palestinian flag when they were celebrating their win. So I use this quote because I really want to mention a few things. Firstly, I want to put forward the special context for Palestinians in Germany, which is also unique but complex, given the special context and history in Germany. And second, because you wouldn't expect this anti-Palestinian sentiment to come from a so-called leftist newspaper. To consider the mere raising of a Palestinian flag as an anti-Semitic, you wouldn't expect this from a leftist newspaper. But an advice right from the beginning, you need to forget everything you know about the left when it comes to German left, and particularly when it comes to Palestine. And thirdly, it is also to stress how easily an anti-Semitic accusation can be casted in Germany, and how destructive this conflation of Palestinian identity and symbols with anti-Semitism. I think if we want to characterize the debate about Palestine in Germany, I would mention two things that I find really important and predominant characters. The first is Palestine is always discussed in the context of anti-Semitism. There is always conflation between discussion about Palestine and anti-Semitism. And second, the conversation is when it's about us, it happens without us. We are not invited to the conversation, and the public sphere is often shut for Palestinians. So I think also, in recent years, many would agree that there is an escalating anti-Palestinian sentiment in Germany. It's growing, and it's growing fast, and it's actually frightening. Many also think, mentioning the BDS, that the anti-BDS motion that was passed by the German Bundestag parliament in 2019 was one of those landmarks down the road. Not because it is special for Germany to be anti-BDS. I mean, we are seeing anti-BDS sentiments all over Europe, but because it's where anti-Semitism is being used extensively and unchallenged by German media and by German politicians and by German organizations in order to silence any Palestinian solidarity or even Palestinian identity. I think in today's Germany, what's at stake is not even being a BDS activist. We are not even there. What is at stake for Palestinians, and with that I will end because I'm sure we can elaborate later, what is at stake for Palestinians in Germany today is being Palestinian, is the ability to express your Palestinian identity, raise Palestinian flag, use Palestinian symbols without being accused of anti-Semitism, without being faced with hostility and suppression.
Thank you, Abir, for that very concise and eye-opening introduction to the German scene. Let's move to Nadia and to Germany and and to Spain and France more specifically. Nadia, in your research and analysis, you've been examining France and Spain as arenas for both protecting and criminalizing the rights of citizens to boycott and to mobilize politically. Can you tell us more about these contexts and how they compare, how they differ, and what is at stake for Palestine solidarity activism?
Sure. Thank you very much for your question, Nadim. Please let me know if you can't hear me very well or if I am speaking too much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you, sharing what I have been researching for my doctoral dissertation here in Edinburgh. I think that first of all, it's really important maybe to clarify that the policies that each country has been taking, and when I refer to these countries, I refer to not only to France and Spain, but I would say that this problem, the muscling and repression against pro-Palestinian and Palestinian activists or human rights defenders, I would say, has been taking place, especially in Western Europe and the US, also Canada, For this policy lab, I am only focusing or mainly focusing in France and Spain, but it's important to have that in mind. So that's why we are not including, for example, any Latin American countries in this discussion. And I think that it's really, really important, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about France and Spain, because in these countries, a lot of things have been going on and are going on nowadays, and they are frequently ignored, I would say, because of a language gap. So ignored like by the English-speaking, Arabic-speaking world. But yeah, there are so many things going on with regard to the Palestinian solidarity movement in general, but especially, which is the topic of this policy lab, with regard to boycotts, to the call to boycott, to the calls, I would say, because it's not only about the BDS movement, it's broad, it has been, and it's broader than that, to the calls to boycott Israel because of its crimes against the Palestinian people. That Israel has been committing for over 70 years now without any sanction. So what's really, really noticeable for me about these two countries, because of course they have some similarities and some differences, what is really noticeable to me is that in these two countries, unlike other countries of the world, I would say, people have been taking not only to court, but they have been facing legal proceedings for calling for a boycott. And not only any type of legal proceeding, but criminal legal proceedings, which is really, really noticeable. Like just for calling for a boycott, just for exercising your right to freedom of expression, which is enshrined in every democracy. You know, in these countries, they present themselves as very solid, strong, democratic countries. They have taken human rights defenders just for calling for a boycott of Israel, of course. And you know, the criminal proceedings should be the last resort in every democratic system. Like before that, you can use other means to solve a conflict. Then if you want to go to the legal side of things, you can use like civil law, administrative law. But criminal law is like a very harsh tool because it damages people's basic rights. Like, so that's really important. And one thing that is, and especially in France, because in France this has been taking place for many, it started many years before than in Spain. They have been much more criminal proceedings. And also, I would say, and this is why, and I'm going to speak about this later with more detail, and that's why the two cases where the European Court of Human Rights, the regional human rights court, the two cases in which it has dealt with the boycott of Israel, or even like the boycotts in general, they involve the state party is France, because France has convicted people in criminal proceedings because they have called to boycott Israel. So that's why they have challenged the French decisions at the regional level. And also, I would say this means another thing, which is also really important, that in France, unlike other countries, I would say, where maybe the government, like or other institutions, public institutions, besides of course private entities, like motivated by the or pressured by the pro-Israeli lobby, not only the government and these other entities, but also the judiciary in France hasn't been able to protect people's human rights, and that's really something. Like, and I don't think this has happened anywhere else, really. Well, that's the most, I would say, that's the most relevant thing. I don't know if I have more time to deepen a little bit on the situation on each country. Yeah. Okay, so
sure, maybe for a couple of more minutes, so we can.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Nadia.
Yeah. So in the case of France, I would say that, as I already mentioned, something really noticeable has been this criminal persecution against BDS or boycott activists. Actually, the first case that got to the European Court dates back to 2002, so before the BDS call was made. And I would say that's one important thing. And also another important thing in France, I would say, that is happening now is that the government, Macron's government, issued 2 decrees to dissolve two pro-Palestinian collectives. Fortunately, earlier this year, the highest administrative court of France suspended the decrees. I would say that they were based on one of the most recent judgment by the European Court of Human Rights, which is Baldassi and others versus France, that I am going to speak more about in a few minutes. But yeah, like basically the government is like carrying out this active prosecution against Palestinian solidarity groups. And also I would say that also in France, many events are being cancelled these days. Like, for example, the presentation of the Amnesty International report on apartheid in against the Palestinian people. And they have not been using the IHRA definition, working definition on anti-Semitism to do this. They have just said like this is too political, it's a really sensitive topic, blah blah blah, like a two sides topic, so you can't only hear from the Palestinians, or I don't know. And in the case of Spain, I would say that the most maybe noticeable phenomena has been this campaign led by the activists there to declare spaces, public institutions, mainly city councils, but not only, also academic, cultural, social spaces, to declare themselves espacios libres de apartheid, like apartheid-free spaces, Israeli apartheid-free spaces, ELAI. And this has been really relevant because they have, like, so many of them have declared themselves, like over 100 institutions, public institutions, have declared themselves or identified themselves as apartheid-free. But they have been taking the city councils, especially, to court by the local Zionist lobby, ACON. And well, there have been different outcomes at the Spanish tribunals. Lately, there was this decision by the Supreme Court of Spain, which is the first one on the matter, and the Supreme Court ruled that the city councils couldn't, like, change the law, like trying to, through an agreement, try to modify the conditions of public procurement, but that they, because of the, but that the city councils had the ability to be in solidarity, for example, with the recognition of the Palestine state demand. So it's, but yeah, it can still be challenged, and yeah, that's basically what is going on in Spain nowadays.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Very troubling events in these 3 contexts, and we're receiving many questions from folks in these different countries doing a lot of the sort of the pro-Palestine advocacy work and sort of countering as much as possible these attempts to criminalize solidarity and boycott. Let us get more specific about sort of what needs to be done and what hasn't been done and what should be done. So I pose the same question to you both. You know, within the different contexts within which you live and operate, what's being done or needs to be done to protect this type of activism, and more specifically, of course, the rights of the actual citizens of these countries to freedom of expression. Which direction do we foresee this moving in? Abir, let's start with you.
Thank you, Nadim. I really want also to add a few things about, like, just connecting to Nadia's talk about also examples and what's happening actually, because I just opened with a broader context, but it's important also to understand the state of mind or the situation on, like, daily basis for Palestinian activists and solidarity movement. So I mentioned the context, and I mentioned the anti-BDS motion that was passed in the German Bundestag in 2019. It's not a legally binding motion, but it has been used as a recommendation, and it's still being used in so many cities and places in order to ban Palestinian solidarity actions, to cancel events, to withdraw awards from people who won prizes in Germany, and there is a witch hunt in the German media against Palestinian journalists, accusing them of anti-Semitism. As I mentioned, it's always like the ultimate thing is to use anti-Semitism, and then no one challenges, and like you can achieve anything. And there is also so canceling events and witch hunt and incitement also, like the one. Or anti-Palestinian or racist sentiments against Palestinians, like the one I opened with regarding raising the Palestinian flags. But there has been, for example, a campaign in Munich where posters were hanged in the metro stations that are really insightful against Palestinians. So and they are state-funded as well. So we are witnessing an escalation and in repression of Palestinian activities. There has been arrests of activists. We remember in the Nakba events in May 2022, all Nakba events were banned in Berlin, for example, and around 200 activists were arrested by the police because they wanted to protest this ban. I mentioned also the incitement, but there is also physical aggression. So we are escalating, and I think this atmosphere, it's breeding also a sort of like violence also. I think it's frightening to think that we are going down this road, and we are going down to a dark place where there will be attacks against Palestinians. There was in May also 22 this year, a vandalism against a Palestinian art exhibition in the art festival Documenta 15. So there are a lot of concerning events that we should, like, we know that that are a good indication how the situation is for Palestinian activities, and we should understand the situation. In addition, I think it's important to understand how this works, how this system of anti-Palestinianism and conflating anti-Semitism with Palestinian solidarity happening. I think in Germany, there is a kind of triangle of alliance triangle, if I may call it this way, that is working in coordination in this respect. It usually, a campaign starts with German Zionists, supportive of Israel, supporters of Israel. They may be journalists, public figures, and organizations. And then there are two other pillars that joined this campaign. One pillar is the German right wing, including radical and extreme right wing, including neo-Nazis, and some groups in the German left. This is the other pillar. So they also join this system of chasing Palestinians, repression of Palestinians. Now, if I want to also understanding this situation, I think it's important to understand that we need to empower Palestinian voices. And this is something extremely important. So answering your question, Nadim, about what needs to be done, there is a lot of Palestinian activism and building alliances across people of color, across immigrants, and so on. And this is something extremely important that many Palestinians are working on. And we can see that there is a growing movement facing this repression. I mean that it's important to empower our voices in the media. It is important also to make a switch, because in many cases, Palestinians who are accused of anti-Semitism, they become apologetic, because it's really hard to go against the stream, because everyone is against you, media, politicians, organizations. And it's important to empower voices that are unapologetic about Palestine. And it's important to mention, and Nadia mentioned this, the legal front. There is a lot of things happening on the legal front, and it's working. For example, in the case of the Palestinian journalists from the Deutsche Welle who've been dismissed based on accusation of anti-Semitism. 2 of them have won a court files, and the court decided that their dismissal is illegal. Actually, there has been a lot of cases against cities that canceled events that were supposed to host Palestinian solidarity events. I think the European Legal Center and lawyers in Germany, especially Palestinian German lawyers, are doing tremendous job on this front. So just to summarize, I think our discourse should be unapologetic. Legal battles are working and they are extremely important, and continue to organize and build cross intersectional solidarity is also important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Abir. Let's move to the legal aspects. I think Nadia, you'll tell us more about what is happening legally across these different countries.
And also I'll try to answer to your question, Nadim, the one you already asked Abir, because I agree with her. I think that also even though Germany and France and Spain have many differences between them, I think that as in the rest of the world where this is happening, it's really, really important to do what the Palestinians, I would say, have been doing for a while now. The BNC, for example, the BDS National Committee has been doing this, and it has to do with building alliances with other social movements, people of color, anti-racist collectives, feminist collectives, etc. Because I think that unlike Germany, and these are good news, I would say, for France and Spain, the Zionist lobbies are connected to the far right and to the right. So the left and the far left and human rights groups, I would say that in general, of course, there are always like very sad exceptions, but I would say that in general they are like more pro-Palestinian. So I think that to make it stronger, these movements and political parties, and to like basically everyone who is like willing to have like a strong democratic system, to have more human rights, especially that human rights, I would say. I think that's key for the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement now. Another thing, and that's a difference between Germany versus France and Spain, is that in Germany, for what I understand, there is the largest Palestinian community in Europe. That's not the case in France or Spain. In France or Spain, I would say that the Palestinian communities are not really big. And so, yeah, the situation is quite different. So mainly people who has been like attacked and that has suffered repression are mainly, I would say, non-Palestinians. So that's something that I thought while listening to Abir, and being like optimistic and also looking at the legal side of things, at least in Europe. I want to focus on the Baldassi ruling that I already mentioned by the European Court of Human Rights. Basically, this ruling is on the case of 11 activists from France. They were not, this is important, they were not all of them French citizens. Some of them were people from other parts that were living in France, or migrants, and they were convicted for incitement to discrimination on the grounds of to economic discrimination on the grounds of nationality. Let's recall that in France, in 2010, the former Ministry of Justice during the Sarkozy government, Michelle Elliot-Marie, she issued an administrative provision to prosecute BDS activists as under these grounds, under the grounds of incitement to economic discrimination, which is enshrined in a law that was passed in France in 1881, which is called the Law on the Freedom of the Press. So many activists after that, well, they were already persecuted, but this was increased by this measure by the Ministry of Justice. And in this context, 11 activists that were pursuing BDS activities in the north of the country, basically they were distributing leaflets in a supermarket, calling people, consumers, not to buy Israeli products. And this was just after the gas-led operation on the Gaza Strip. We have to remember that the UN mission after this massacre states that the human right, the crime against humanity of persecution was committed in Gaza, and there was no sanction for Israel. So yeah, like boycott efforts were intensified, and in France they were calling to boycott Israeli products pacifically. However, they were taken to court, to this criminal proceeding that I mentioned before. They were convicted, and they went to the European Court of Human Rights. And in June 2020, the European Court of Human Rights released this judgment, which is extremely important, Baldassi and others versus France, in which the court basically states that a call for a boycott, and this is really like in accordance or in coherence with the previous jurisprudence of the court on matters of political freedom of expression, that the court like concretely says that BDS is a political call for a boycott, which is legitimate, like all political expression, because even if political expression is offensive or virulent, it's still protected under the European Convention on Human Rights. The court also says, which is also very, very important, I would say, it kind of sets the boundaries that BDS activists and actually any boycott activist should respect in Europe. So I would say that there are these three boundaries. So first of all, we shouldn't be making any like anti-Semitic or hatred utterance, like not saying anything that could be interpreted as discriminatory. So we have to be like really careful with regard to that. Also, we have to be like conducting peaceful activities, which is also a condition like for human rights defenders to be considered as such, like under the UN regulations. We have to conduct peaceful activities. And also what the court says, and I don't agree with that, is that this is for ordinary citizens, because the court has a previous jurisprudence which dates back to 2009 in the case Willem versus France, that has to do with the mayor, the communist mayor of a French town, Seclam, and this mayor, following the attacks of the Israeli army, the raid of the Israeli army in Jenin in 2002. He announced at the city council meeting his decision to like not to buy more Israeli Jews. Like he would ask that to the catering services of the municipality, and because of that, he was also tried in France, criminally convicted, and the court actually in that case didn't like found that France was right, that there was no violation of his freedom of expression. So in the Baldassi ruling, the court kind of explains why it ruled differently in both cases. And it says, in this case, these were ordinary citizens that were like trying to trigger a public discussion in the supermarket or at the supermarket. But in the other case, this was a mayor, so he wasn't entitled to call for a boycott. I disagree with this. I think that mayors are basically politicians, like elected representatives. And I think that all politicians should be entitled to call for boycotts. Politicians are not expected to be neutral. Like they are more expected like to be the opposite than neutral, even if they are like in these positions, even if they are mayors or parliamentarians or prime ministers or whatever. So yeah, but still, and this will be the last thing to say now. still, I think that it's a very good decision, and actually, it had the Baldassi one, and actually, it has had many practical effects. So, for example, in France, there haven't been any more like criminal prosecutions for calling for a boycott. The last one was one against one activist, Olivia Semor. She was being prosecuted because she called to boycott Teva, the Israeli pharmaceutical company, and she was acquitted earlier this year on the grounds of the Baldassi ruling. And also in Spain, there was this trial against a group of activists that are from the city of Valencia. They called to boycott a music festival in 2015, where Matis Yahu, this Zionist renowned singer who supports the Israeli army openly, was being performing, and they were taken to court in Spain on the grounds of like anti-Semitic hate. That was like the name of the charge, but they were also not acquitted, but the proceeding was dismissed following the Baldassi ruling, and also the decrees that were like suspended by the administrative court in France that I referred to earlier. Also, in the resolution, it's very clear that the Conseil d'État, the court, was based on the Baldassi ruling to make its decision. So yeah, it has been very important, and I want to highlight the fact that we are protected, that we can call for boycotts in Europe as long as we comply with these I don't know, like limits or conditions.
Thank you, Nadia. We have so many questions coming in. I'd love to turn to some of the audience questions. Several of them have to do with Germany, as it seems that as Nadia mentioned, it seems that there's precedent for hope, let's say, in France, at least in Spain, relative to Germany, which seems to be taking quite of a different turn. So to try to ask as many of the questions relating to Germany as possible, Abir, would ask you the first question, and quite sort of bluntly, how can Palestinian solidarity activists organize in Germany without risking criminal charges? This is from one attendee. There's also the question of is there a German left? And sort of, I mean, it was a brief question, but what is the left like in Germany at this point? And sort of, can it be mobilized? Can it be brought into the fray of Palestine solidarity activism? We can go to some of the other questions later, but what are the actual tactics that can be taken to avoid criminalization?
So I have to mention that in recent years, the case that was in court trying to criminalize 3 activists, the case is known by Humboldt 3, was actually the activist won this case, so they were not criminalized by the court. I think we have a lot of work to do in the legal front, and there is a lot of things happening. I think we should use the resources that are out there, and we should continue doing activism without really being afraid of legal repercussions, because we can use the resources out there. But I think also it's easy to say this in theory. I know that in many places there is so much hostility that people really are afraid of their own safety. I would say, like, we are demanding a space to be able to freely express our identity and discuss Palestine. And I think what we also need to ask for is safe space, not only space. So I understand these concerns of activists. I think one of the important things is to build alliances, and this is one of the things that Berlin has been working on, because Berlin is becoming a multi-ethnic, multicultural city, and there are a lot of communities here, a lot of immigrant communities that are facing racism and xenophobia, and there is a lot of work to do on building alliances. I think as long as we are very clear about rejecting any anti-Semitic sentiments in our movement, we have to be very clear and very straightforward about this. We should not be apologetic about anything else, and we should continue, trying our best to fight for the space. So yeah, I think when there is a feeling that some activists in certain city are being alone, I think it's important to reach out to other cities and try to build alliances and in like have a bigger group so you feel safe also to have this fight. And the other question was about the German left. I mean, yeah. So if we discuss, if the question is referring to what I mentioned about like one of the pillars that being also anti-Palestinian, yes, there are some groups within the German left or even the central, the center left within the political parties. There are certain groups that are anti-Palestinian. I think there is many examples of incitement or like anti-Palestinian discourse that came out of these groups, including the Die Linke, which is the I would say most leftist in the German politics. Within the Die Linke, there is Anti-Deutsche group, which is also holding a anti-Palestinian sentiment. Some people even call it not anti-Deutsch, call it anti-Palestinian. And I think, in the Die Linke, there are two different streams. There is one stream that is supporting Palestinian rights and solidarity, and there is a stream that is unfortunately anti-Palestinian and is playing into the same politics of the other political factions. Even the Green Party or the other parties who are considered left or central left, they have groups within them that are playing into this anti-Palestinian politics. I don't know if I answered everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Abir. Thank you very much. Nadia, I'd like to pose a question to you that's also related to a question from an audience member. This audience member is in the United States, saying that neoliberal academics in the US sort of abuse the term freedom of speech to say that it can be used also to show against Palestinians, saying that free speech against Palestinians is also free speech. So is the conflation occurring as well in terms of, what is free speech in Europe, essentially? And this goes to the question of constitutional rights within Europe. We talked during our earlier discussions that it's not so much a right, it's not so much a constitutional right to boycott as much as it is a constitutional right to freedom of expression. So, I mean, certainly the United States is a very unique context when it comes to criminalizing Palestinian solidarity, activism. But what does this look like in across Europe? Maybe certainly, Abir, if you could weigh in as well on Germany. But in the context you've studied, Nadia, how is the right to free speech used or abused or sort of reflected in this discourse?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think it's a very interesting one. I would say that freedom of expression is a right that is, of course, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and also in national constitutions here in Europe. Well, I still think of the UK as part of Europe. Sorry about that, but it's also enshrined here in the UK and in Europe. And also in Europe at the regional level, right? Like at the Council of Europe, which is like the cornerstone of human rights in Europe. It's enshrined. But if you compare this Council of Europe regulation of freedom of expression in both the convention and the court and the jurisprudence of the court versus what we have in the US, the Constitution, the First Amendment specifically, and the jurisprudence especially by the Supreme Court, but not only, of course. The enshrinement of the right is quite different because and it has to do with the history of each country, right? Like in the 20th century in Europe, we had these two wars, and following the second one is that the Council of Europe is established. So basically, in Europe, even if freedom of expression and especially political freedom of expression is protected, and this is what the Baldassi ruling acknowledges. So that's why I said it was like in coherence with the previous jurisprudence of the court. There are content-based restrictions to freedom of expression in Europe, So that's why you can't say anything anti-Semitic, or you can't say anything that could like be interpreted as a Holocaust denial, because you not only like the time or where you give an opinion is important here, but also the content of the opinion. Like hate speech is not allowed here. Of course, not all hate speech has been treated the same way. For example, when it comes to anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial, and this is widely documented in academic literature, it's not myself speaking. It's like the topic. The court would even like deal with that. They would treat this. They would treat that as like as an abuse of right based on the Article 17 of the Convention, because that's not even like up for discussion. But when it comes to the Armenian genocide, for example, it's up to discussion. Maybe the court will consider that it's not lawful to deny the Armenian genocide, but at least they would examine that. But in the case of anti-Semitism, they wouldn't even like examine that. So not all hate speech is treated the same way. However, in the US, it's quite different, because in general, content-based restrictions on freedom of expression are not allowed. So there are some exceptions, like, for example, incitement to illegal activity or fighting words, child pornography, that are not allowed. But in general, in the US, you are supposed to be able, under the First Amendment, to say whatever you want. Like, you can say something racist, you can say something like against women. You know, there are this huge debate over pornography, for example, and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that also, and this is very important, in the US Supreme Court recognized in 1982, in a very famous judgment, NAACP versus Claremont, that the right to call for politically motivated boycott was protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution. So that's why I think that the name that this report, one of the reports by Palestine Legal, is in the US, is quite brilliant, because it's called the Palestine exception to free speech. In the US, I would say there is clearly like an exception to free speech when it comes to the Palestinians, and that's relevant to me. And yeah, I think I answered the question. Good. We can't hear you.
You are muted, Nadim.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Nadia. Sorry. Abir, let's go back to you in the German context. We have a couple more questions referring to or addressing Germany. There's curiosity around sort of what is behind, what sort of singles out Germany as a place where sort of anti-Palestinianism is on the rise. Is it linked to, of course, certainly there's a unique history when it comes to Germany and the Jewish people and the state of Israel, certainly, but also is it on the rise amongst youth? Is it on the rise amongst certain segments of the population? Why Germany? Why now? And yeah, any reflections on this from your end?
So yeah, I'd like just to comment very quickly about the freedom of speech in Germany, because I think it's crucially important to just really single what's happening in Germany, because I don't think only the freedom of speech of Palestinians is at stake, it's also the freedom of speech of Germans. And they don't have a problem with that. They know that their freedom of speech is compromised when it comes to Palestine, and they don't have a problem with that because they justify it in the name of guilt feeling, in the name of the special history and context, and they don't challenge it. So I think it's really like very like, and you know, people can express some opinions in private rooms, but they do not dare to go out and express them. And they don't have a problem with that. They say, okay, sorry, I can't do this. We have a special. And this is connecting with the second question. I think What's happening here is that people are trying to rid themselves from the history, from the burden of the Holocaust, and throw it onto the shoulders of Palestinians and immigrants and people of color. It is easier for them to think that they have done with it. It's part of the past, and we have worked it out. And all the anti-Semitism that we are facing here is coming from the outside. It's being exported into our society. I think this is one way to rid themselves of responsibility. I think also the rise of the right wing also plays into this as well. And I think it's the refusal to confront and learn from history. Like, I think what is happening today to Palestinians, there has been a lot of things that have been written about how, like, Palestinians in schools, for example, are facing hostility. I hear a lot of stories about Palestinian children and Palestinian families who are concerned for kids if they go to school and express their Palestinian identities. This is happening right now, and there is a complete denial by the Germans and complete refusal to learn from history. I think Palestinians are facing tremendous anti-Palestinian and racist sentiments that is really taking us to a dark place, and they are refusing to see that and learn from their history.
Thank you, Abir. I'd like to go to a question about citizens and non-citizens when it comes to this discussion, and taking it back to Nadia, and with your legal background, your legal expertise, what does sort of criminalization of Palestine solidarity activism, what does it look like for a citizen of these countries versus, let's say, a Palestinian immigrant in one of these countries? What is at stake legally? Certainly, in terms of presence within the country, legal repercussions, deportation, so on. What is at stake and what is on the line?
So for what I have studied, I don't see, at least not formally, there are no differences between French citizens or Spanish citizens versus people from other nationalities in these countries. So, for example, the French citizens were convicted just as the non-French citizens, in the Baldassi case. In Spain, it's kind of the same thing. Of course, always the situation for migrants and refugees is always more vulnerable or precarious than for nationals. Like, I'm here in the UK with a student visa, which is kind of precarious. I'm not complaining. I know there are people worse than me, but still, it's not like the ideal situation. I wouldn't dare to engage myself in some stuff, for example. Yeah, so it's always more vulnerable, but I don't think that has been like an important issue at stake here.
Yeah, if I can jump in really quick. I think, in Germany, it is unfortunately an issue for actually many Palestinians. There are many Palestinians who are still how is it called? They don't have a status here. And many people are afraid of deportation, and there has been deportations happening here. So people think twice because of the hostility and because of their status here. Not only Palestinians, but other also immigrants and asylum seekers.
Can I add something? Because I think that we are about to close. I just want to mention the work of the European Legal Support Center. They are like the European version of the Palestine Legal in the US. And the European Legal Support Center, they have been working on legal cases here in Europe related to repression against pro-Palestinian and Palestinian activists. Visit their website, report any incidents you have. They work in connection with national lawyers. So yeah, I mean, if you have any problem anywhere in Europe, I think that they might be able to give you like practical support and help.
I just have one question back to both of you. Maybe we can end on this in terms of a positive note and networking and connecting with organization and groups and transnational and intersectional solidarity in terms of the networking we were discussing earlier in the discussion. What does sort of intersectional transnational solidarity look like when it comes to working with groups within colonized Palestine itself? We had a question from someone who works for the Kairos Palestine Solidarity Network, which I believe is based in Jerusalem. There are centers. This is an organization that works through churches and in Palestine solidarity. Abir, certainly you are Palestinian and travel to Palestine frequently. What does this solidarity and transnational sort of intersectionality look like when it comes to connecting with the solidarity groups on the ground in Palestine? And Nadia, you're in the United Kingdom, but also as a Palestinian from Chile, you have a lot of networking and a lot of access to Latin American circles. Is there any work being done in these circles, and sort of what can be done or should be done to strengthen these networks?
Nadim, I'm not sure I got the question. Is the question, how does intersectionality look like, or what should be done?
Thank you. Sorry, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let me clarify. Just what does the work of intersectionality look like when it comes to, let's say, activists in Germany and their allies in Palestine, on the ground in Palestine? Is there solidarity happening in terms of these two contexts? And similarly to Nadia, is there sort of any work being done between, let's say, Latin American solidarity activists? We know there's a lot in Chile that happens, and European groups or groups in the UK, for example. Is there any specific? I mean, Nadia was mentioning some organizations, so I thought maybe important to sort of give voice to these groups and
if I can mention, yes, of course. I think Palestine Speaks is a growing Palestinian solidarity movement. It is led by Palestinians, and that was really important development in the recent few years, that we have a Palestinian-led organization that is becoming an umbrella for solidarity action for Palestine. And it's growing also all over Germany, not only in Berlin. It started in Berlin, but there are other groups forming in different German cities. And there are other groups, of course. There are the traditional Palestinian communities that they have been here for so long, and they are well established, and they also do their own activism and work. And I think there is a lot of work. So within this context, there is a lot of work happening in building alliances with other, as I mentioned before, Berlin is really a space for a lot of interactions and intersectionality with the people of color. It's multi-ethnic. There's groups from almost everywhere, and there is like a history of immigrants here, like from the Turkish immigration through the Kurdish and Iraqi and Palestinian and Lebanese and Syrian, and from other communities around the world, including also Europe. And it's becoming really a space for multi-ethnic, for intersectionality, for discussing, for building alliances. And this is happening all the time in Germany, especially in Berlin. I'm not sure about the connection with Palestine, but there is a lot of work also happening with that's important also in this aspect. There is a lot of work happening with the Palestinian young generation, like the Palestinian German generation that has been kind of marginalized within the Palestinian context. And I think a lot of them are joining the movement, are being empowered, their voices is being empowered. They are getting to go to Palestine and visit Palestine and build alliances also there and connections. And I think this is a really important process and something that's really refreshing in the Palestinian activism work. And I think this is hugely important because this generation was born here, they speak the language, and they need to be empowered because they can really face the situation and they can do a lot of impact here.
Thank you, Abir. Nadia?
Yeah, I think that these questions depend a lot on each context. For example, in Spain, where I lived when I did my master's degree, it's really not easy. So the Spanish community in Spain, I would say, is quite small. So mainly pro-Palestinian activists were or are part of the left, and they work in like building alliances with migrants, organizations, refugees, feminist groups, and for them that's really important, and that's linked to the left side of the political spectrum, and I think that for example, to have Podemos and the Communist Party like being part of the government, it's like a good news for the Palestinians. Like that's how things look in Spain, I would say. In other parts of the world, it's quite different. For example, in my home country, Chile, it's very different scenario, because in Chile, there is the largest Palestinian community outside the Arab world. So we are around 17, 18 million of inhabitants in Chile, and 500,000 of them have Palestinian descent. So in Chile, it's like all the pro-Palestinian landscape is like led by the own Palestinians. They are those like are active in our cause. And because of how Chile is like a neoliberal country, where social movements are not that empowered, I would say, even though lately have like in the under the umbrella of BDS and the growing of BDS in Latin America and in Chile, alliances have been and are being built. I would say that's still like the most important forces in terms of solidarity with the Palestinians, or in terms of doing things for the Palestinians, are like their own Palestinians, because the Palestinians in Chile are like in a very privileged position, unlike other parts of the world. So they can do it, and they are actually like doing it. So yeah, I think that's a thing. And I want to say, like, to conclude, like, just to add something. So my thesis is about boycotts. I'm a huge fan of boycotts, but but I want to say that this is not about boycotts. Like, even though boycotts have been criminalized in the case of the Palestinians in these Western democracies, even in the US, they are at stake. You know, a right that people in the US, we all thought they had. Now the Supreme Court is going to like actually, like, they are going to revisit that right, which is incredible. But this is not about boycotts. This is about whatever is effective in terms of being in terms of defending Palestinian rights. So, for example, it's crystal clear that it's not about boycotts when you see that it's really easy to boycott Russia, for example, for invading Ukraine. Nobody had any moral concerns regarding boycotting Russia. I agree with, I like boycotts. I want to boycott Russia, but why not to boycott Israel? Like, I mean, Russia was like almost immediately expelled from the Council of Human Rights at the UN level. Like, what else has Israel need to do to be expelled as well? Like, why Israel is never sanctioned? That's why we are boycotting. And in the US, it's the same thing. Like, actually, exactly the same academic associations that would endorse the call to boycott South Africa because of the apartheid regime in the 80s are the same associations, that are refusing to endorse the boycott of Israel. So it's not about boycotts. It's not about boycotts. It's about not being in solidarity with the Palestinians. It depends on the content. It has to do, for example, I guess, with Islamophobia in France. It has to do with, I don't know, this fear of anti-Semitism, this guilt in Germany. It has to do with, it depends on the context. But I think it's really important, like to defend Palestinian human rights more than ever. and not to get distracted by all of these smearing campaigns and attacks and repression, because even if they are harsh on us, they want us to be distracted from what's going on in Palestine, and we can't allow them to do that. Like in Palestine, war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed against the Palestinians on a daily basis, and we can't focus on what's going on here and forget about what's going on there. We have to be able to do both. So yeah.
Thank you, Nadia. As
Those
one
are my
of the
final
audience
words.
members said, it's the time to build a stronger European Palestinian solidarity network. And I would add, it need not only be European, but absolutely, there should be a focus in Europe as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We've gone 5 minutes over, which is rare for our policy labs, but certainly the conversation has been very engaging, and our audience has been exceptional this evening. I want to thank you, Abir and Nadia, for joining us and for sharing your insight and expertise into this increasingly worrying development across Europe, Germany, Spain, and France more specifically. But as we know, it is a global phenomenon across several Western contexts. It is worrying, but you've also shown us that there are efforts to challenge it, and that these efforts must continue to grow. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. And again, thank you to our audience for your participation and engagement. Your thoughts really and comments enriched the conversation, and I look forward to your attendance in our policy labs in the new year. And to that end, we are in the midst of our year-end fundraising campaign at Al-Shabaka, where we are working to raise 30,000 to support our network of 200 Palestinian experts and analysts. We are just $10,000 short of our goal. Your support today would go directly towards our policy network, helping us to amplify the work of our members, build the analytical and policy writing skills of early career members, and strengthen connections between them, including in terms of solidarity. Should you be able to contribute, please click on the donate button that appears on your screens below. Thank you, everyone, and good night to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.